My name is Joe Miller. I'm one of the National Board members of Vietnam Veterans Against the War. I'd like to welcome everybody to the annual VVAW IVAW Memorial Day event. Yes, I'm going to try to speak louder. Okay, thank you. VVAW has been holding these annual events since the 1970s, since the early 1970s. And the crowds have grown and shrunk, and things are, and we have bad weather and we have good weather. So it looks like we're getting a nice crowd today and great weather. So let's hope that this stays. We're going to have 6 speakers coming up. Try to keep them short. So I'm going to try to keep my remarks short as well. First of all, I've been asked by one of our oldest members. It happens to be my aunt, Eleanor. She's a World War II vet and a Korean War vet. She's turning 100 years old this year, and she can't come out to these things anymore. It's been about a year since she's been able to get out to these events, and she feels really bad about missing all the comradeship. So she wanted me to give you her greetings and best wishes to everybody. Now, we've all seen the TV stuff about the Memorial Day sales, the cookouts, get a new car for Memorial Day, whatever. Spend. It's all about money, right? People forget what Memorial Day is about, just like they forget what Veterans Day is all about. That's why we're here, to remind people of what Memorial Day should stand for. Memorialize the dead, the wounded, the injured, the PTSD-stricken from all the wars that we've been involved in, especially those unjust wars that have been more recent. And VVAW took the lead in this back in the 1960s. People might forget that it's almost 50 years since VVAW first established itself in 1967, under a Democratic administration, by the way. VVAW was active from 67 through 68 through the election, and then when Nixon came into office, VVAW kicked up its gears even more. We're equal opportunity protesters. We'll protest in any administration, right? If they're not doing the right thing, we're going to be there, we're going to make some noise. Now, one thing that also is forgotten very often is to memorialize the dead on the other side. We don't think about the people on the other side that we were responsible for killing. We don't think about those names that might be on a wall. If we think about, specifically in relation to Indochina, if we think about the number of dead in Indochina, approximately 3 to 4 million people during our war against the Vietnamese and against the Indochinese people. Think how long that wall would be if we were serious about this. We need to remember that wars don't bring peace. Wars tend to produce more wars. So we need to keep that in mind as well whenever we come together for an event like this. I want to, although they're not going to speak, I want to recognize members of National Nurses United for being here today in support of us. They're always out here with us, and they work with many of the vets locally in the VA Center, and so we need to make sure that we recognize their being here. And also, if you haven't got the latest issue of The Veteran with our new format, make sure you talk to one of us. I'm sure we have plenty of copies around to pass around. I know I have a bag full of them, okay? All right, we're going to start. First speaker, Hannah Frisch. Hannah is going to be representing the Civilian Soldier Alliance. Sorry. I need a drink. All right.
Okay, hi again. So, as a member of Civilian Soldier Alliance, I've been so lucky to be able to support and participate with Iraq Veterans Against the War. Today I want to tell you about a program called Vets vs. Hate. It was founded recently by Beyond the Choir, by Veterans for Peace, and by Iraq Veterans Against the War. If you watch TV, maybe you've seen IVAW members on the screen at a Trump rally holding up signs saying things like, veterans support our Muslim brothers and sisters. Veterans are not props for hate. This is an important program. Personally, I'm not that worried about Trump becoming president, but it's very worrisome, the Islamophobia and the racism that Trump has brought out into the open. And Trump should never get away with painting himself as a supporter of veterans. He never did anything for veterans before he was running for president, and even his big fundraiser for veterans organizations hasn't distributed half the money that he raised. I'm proud of Iraq Veterans Against the War for standing up against Islamophobia and racism and standing with the people of color who are also there to protest Trump. IVAW member Zach Choate was at a Trump rally protesting down in Alabama. And this is what he said afterwards. These Trump rallies can be pretty intimidating, and I say that as a white combat veteran. So I think the folks from Black Lives Matter are extremely brave. Donald Trump may be a joke, but the hate that he has brought out is no joking matter. If there are any veterans here of any era who are interested in getting involved with Vets versus Hate, please come and talk to me after the program.
Thank you, Hannah. Our next speaker is member of VVAW, Meg Miner, Air Force veteran from 1979 to 1995. She joined VVAW in 2002 and has been one of our most important members these days, especially when we're working on our archives up in Wisconsin. Meg Miner.
How's everybody doing today? You can hear me okay? Up top? Awesome. So, I think Joe said I enlisted in the Air Force in 1979. That was during the post-Vietnam rebuild efforts that were going on. I don't know that I was actually in the first group of people that I think have come to be known as the economic draftees. But I think I was in the early days of the people who volunteered for personal economic reasons. Anybody else out here an economic enlistee, volunteer? Anybody do that? Just a couple of us. Woo-hoo! I don't know what that says about us, but thank you for raising your hand. So I, on my discharge papers, have 2 wars listed as being a participant in them. One of them was the Gulf War, and one of them was the Cold One, if anybody remembers the Cold War. I have no personal combat experience, but my remarks today will relate to the issue of women in combat today. The Gulf War, I think, is faded from memory. It faded pretty quickly. It was pretty quick itself. The ground war was, but the air operation lasted a pretty long time, and I don't know how many people really know that. But much longer, certainly, than the ground war did. So my war experience didn't actually take place in 1991, when most people recognize the Gulf War is happening. My war happened right around probably 1993. I should probably look that up. It's on my paperwork somewhere. But the shock and awe was only part of it. We continued to shock and awe the hell out of the people in Iraq for a very, very long time, also under Democratic administrations. So in addition to being later than the official war, I had gotten off the front line as a mechanic, which was my original job. By that time in my career, it was quite a ways down the road for me, and I was into operations at that time. So I always hasten to add that my war was air conditioned. I was mostly in operations, and I got to see how flight operations and maintenance operations, which was my specialty then, work together. So I had quite a bit of a different war experience. But my unit did support the 1991 war from Turkey, which was where I eventually went. And I had women friends who were in other units who worked on planes out of Saudi Arabia. Those were the two areas of operations that we worked out of. And they experienced missile attacks and threats pretty frequently. And certainly the women who were flying, refueling aircraft, and other types of air operations were in that type of harm's way during that time. So the designation for combat involves at least two equity issues for me. One is monetary, because bonuses, let's admit it, we get bonuses when we're in a combat zone. But the other is the designation that goes on your record, your military service record, and that has implications for people who are in it as a career, right? So there are opportunities that open up because of combat experiences. But just as George Orwell observed in Animal Farm, there's a perception of equity, but without the specific job titles, some of us are more equal than others. In Orwell's case, it was the pigs. We won't say anything about our superiors. But with that thought, I want to turn back to the Cold War a little bit. And it was a pretty long time ago that it started. It lasted a heck of a long time, but I also think that it's something that people don't think about in terms of what's going on today. So here's my really quick reductionist view of the Cold War. Are you ready? We fought two big European wars in the first half of the 20th century, and then we sat on everyone until they couldn't resist the lure of capitalism and commercialism and consumerism anymore. And then we made nice, and now we have trade deals. Now, I was an airplane and engine mechanic during the last part of the Cold War. One particular special duty assignment I had two missions. One was for peacetime, and one was in the case of war. And I had to apply for this job and be evaluated before being accepted. And I completed all the training that the men in my unit did. And I really don't remember how many people were in that unit, but I do know there were just two women besides me. There were three of us total in that unit. Now, we went through a lot of training, and then when we met all of the criteria, everyone who passed the training was awarded what was called combat maintenance certification. So you could do combat maintenance in theater. They had regular exercises during the time that I was in this unit to keep us all proficient. And that all sounds pretty normal, right? So you ready for the punchline? Okay, so I was told that if we actually went into combat, I wouldn't be deployed with my colleagues, my male colleagues. So again, this idea of some of us are more equal than others. Now, I think of what that does when we talk about unit cohesion. There's a lot of people who like to throw around those terms when they're separating or joining dissimilar elements. What it does to unit cohesion, how it made me feel compared to the men in my unit, and yes, indeed, some of us are more equal than others. But let's bring this all back today. I'm of probably at least three minds, I think I could find a couple more, on the recent announcements about women in combat, how I feel about this issue. It's pretty complex, and probably if I had to do this tomorrow, I'd think of something different to say. But first, I'm skeptical of titles versus reality. right? So we're going to put a lot of people through a lot of angst, and then what's really going to happen when it comes down to it? I don't know the answer to that. My second thought is I'm really appalled, ambivalent, I don't know, I can never find the right words about the need for war. I think I get it in some pretty extreme cases, but I frankly wish that we could take back the last bloody 15 years of this war and skip the next 50 or more with varying levels of hostility that never seem to end, and go right to the part where we have these people accept Walmart as their Lord and Savior. Can we do that? I don't know, it's just a thought. But the third part that I think about of women in combat is just really kind of an overwhelming sadness that this is the big gender equity issue of our time. For starters, women have always been in combat, all right? It's a question of preparation. Are they prepared? Are they equipped to deal with it? Or are they just left there to be killed by somebody who gets in their way? Once they're trained, will their training be used and valued? Will their assignments be equitable? These are open questions, and I hope we all are doing a watchdog job of paying attention to this issue as it plays out. But more importantly to me is the question of suitability of any person for combat. I mean, really. I want a fuller description on the assumption that we have to have war as a way to subdue people just so that they get on with our way of life, which of course is always the better because it's in our interests, and who the hell cares about what anybody else cares about their life? Because we know best. Okay, I'm ranting. Here comes the closure. I didn't go into the Air Force as a patriot, but I became somewhat of one along the way. The military gave me a job and stability at a time in my life when I needed it. My absolutely amazing sister gave me stability and a home and support at every turn of my crazy mixed up path in life. And I didn't become reflective about any of this, until after September 11th. And it just boggles my mind when I think about it now, and I think of the unguarded, abhorrent bloodlust of my country people after that incident, and I realized how different I really had become. And I quite frankly did not know what to do with that. But I'm grateful to the VVAW speakers who talked on the campus that I was at the time and who set an example for me of what patriotism can look like. And I am honored to serve with you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Meg. We're honored to serve with you too. Our next speaker is Edgar Gonzalez-Baeza of Iraq Veterans Against the War. Edgar served for 8 years in the Army Reserve. He's a veteran of the Operation Iraqi Freedom struggle, and he's been a member of IVAW since 2014. Edgar?
Greetings, everybody. My name is Edgar Gonzalez. I'm a United States Army veteran. I was deployed to Iraq. I'm an artist. I'm a teacher. And I'm one of the lucky ones in that I returned. I'm even luckier that I'm still here. We as a nation claim to support our troops, that we respect veterans. And there are countless commercials and special offers for Memorial Day and Veterans Day about how much we respect our veterans and how much we support our troops. However, in the past 5 years, we've been dealing with a suicide epidemic. 22 veterans kill themselves every day. They did not get the support that they needed, and we as a nation have failed them. So I want to run some numbers by you. Since 2001, over 65,000 troops have been killed in combat. This is in Operation Iraqi Freedom, Operation Enduring Freedom, Operation New Dawn. That's a high number. That's a high casualty count. And the events of September 11th, I think a total of 2,997 people are documented as being killed. So we've lost almost double in troops the number of people that we lost during the September 11th attacks. However, with an average of 22 veterans per day killing themselves, that totals 8,030 veterans per year that are dying. That's 128,000 suicides. 128,000 suicides since September 11th. That's 128,000 sons. 128,000 daughters. 128,000 sisters, brothers, mothers, fathers, friends, loved ones. That is 128,000 unnecessary funerals. This is a loss. It's a tragedy. And it is a loss that our Iraqi and Afghani brothers and sisters can sympathize with. While we've conducted combat operations, we have killed hundreds and thousands of innocent people. Hundreds and thousands, because they don't keep track of the numbers on the enemy side, and enemy in air quotes, of innocent Iraqis. And we continue to kill hundreds and thousands of innocent people with drone strikes and with continuing combat operations. And reflecting on this, I think about the origins of Memorial Day. Originally, it started as a declaration after the Civil War, in which it didn't matter if we were memorializing, if they were enemy or friend, if they were our battle buddy, or if we fought against them on the other side between the Union and the Confederate armies. They had decreed that they were going to decorate the graves of everybody who had fought, because at the end of the day, we were human. We were somebody's loved one, or somebody's brother, uncle, father, sister, mother, friend. And it was originally Decoration Day, is what it was called. And it was all founded on the common ground that we were all brothers and sisters. We were all part of humanity. So I'd like everybody to just take some time and reflect that. Remember that. Regarding the veteran suicide epidemic, sometime today, this week, call your representative, call your senators, tell them, don't privatize the VA, give it the adequate funding. We are failing our veterans, we are failing at our promise. And on a personal level, I don't know that I have it in me to lose another friend. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Speaking of support for veterans, besides the National Nurses United being here today, our next speaker is Jeannie Douglas. Jeannie is the director of the Oak Park Vet Center, and she's a prime mover in the organization of the Vietnam Veterans Stand Down, or the Veterans Stand Down more appropriately, that is held twice a year. Jeannie.
I have to write my remarks out so I don't say something stupid. Okay, is that gonna work? Okay, this will probably work out better. I was trying to think about what I could say today that was a little bit different than what I usually say, which is just talk about homelessness among veterans. And it started me thinking about what Memorial Day was about and my memories of Memorial Day as a child. And then I decided to look up this notion of Declaration Day, which is what we called it when I was a kid. And I read the part about Declaration Day was intended as a moment to strew flowers about the graves of those who had died. And this was part of the declaration made by John Logan, who talked about strewing flowers on the graves of those who've fallen. And I found that an interesting concept, because we've come to think about Memorial Day, as we call it now, is a time not just for the fallen, but to memorialize and to honor those who actually served. So how do we go about doing that? There's lots of ways to go about doing that, besides the 10% off you can get at Home Depot if you have something to show you're a veteran. So I was trying to think what that would be like. And I thought of 4 things I thought we needed as goals. And one of those is to pay attention to the fact that a third of the people who return from any combat experience experience post-traumatic stress disorder. This is a long-term disorder that causes impairment at various stages of people's developmental life. In addition to this, we have traumatic brain injury, we have chronic physical ailments, we have loss of limbs, we have etc., etc., etc. If we are going to send men and women to war, and if we believe as a country that that is necessary, then we are obligated to prepare for their return. We are obligated to figure out how to help people return to a civilian life in an appropriate way. I, as well as many other VA employees, are mortified by the remarks of Secretary McDonald this week, and I know that he regrets them probably as well, but his remarks were very painful for many of us to hear. There are people that work hard in the VA system who go the extra mile and care deeply about the work that they do. But the VA is not a perfect system. We are a huge system, and we're simply not responding to all the problems that we should. And then I say again to you that if we are going to send men and women to war, then we must be prepared to provide that quality care when they return, not just when it's convenient. And this we must do. There's no excuse for it if we don't. The second thing I thought that we should pay attention to is the issue of educational benefits for our veterans. For many wars, there have been educational benefits available to veterans, and Illinois is actually one of the most generous states in the Union with regard to educational benefits. But unfortunately, where there's money, there are also people who would like to prey upon those who have the money. For-profit colleges and training programs have stepped up to rob our veterans of their educational benefits. And many times, a person coming home from a war doesn't have their head together for school. Or maybe no one in their family's ever been to school and they don't know how to choose a school. And then they end up in a for-profit college. You can tell I have a little axe to grind with the for-profit colleges. But they end up in a for-profit college and they have used all of their educational benefits, and they're stuck with a whole bunch of loans, and they still don't have any practical means of supporting themselves. This is just plain wrong. This is just plain wrong. And we need a support system in place that helps veterans make better choices about how to use their educational benefits. And there are simply no excuses for not addressing this. We also must pay attention to the issue of military sexual trauma and the long-term impact this has on the women and men who experience it. People who are sexually assaulted in the military are discharged with a double burden. They have all the same readjustment issues that any veteran has, in addition to which they have learned through bitter experience that they cannot even trust the people that they served with. People who experience military sexual trauma are in for a long haul of recovery, and many times do not start to seek that help for years and years for a variety of reasons. But we must be prepared. We must be prepared for when these individuals want to come forward to provide quality care, specialized care for people who have experienced military sexual trauma. And there are no excuses for not providing this. And then finally, of course, I need to talk about the issue of homelessness. We need to pay attention to the issue of homelessness among veterans. Despite years of trying to address this, we still know that it is a significant problem in our country. About 50,000 veterans a night will be homeless in this country, which is a significant improvement, but still unacceptable. We know that it takes about 7 years of decline for a veteran to end up on the street. That means 7 years of unemployment or underemployment, 7 years of untreated addiction, 7 years of medical and physical illness, or psychiatric illness, 7 years of angry, often aggressive behavior with family and friends, 7 years of isolation, 7 years of loss of purpose. Surely we can be smart enough to figure out what to do during those 7 years so that no veteran actually ends up in homelessness. It's unconscionable that we don't figure out a way to provide for those who served our country. There's no excuse for any homeless veteran in this country. So these are my big issues for today, and they are big issues, and they're bigger than we can solve in one night or one afternoon or even 1 year. But I'm not so old or so cynical that I don't think we can still work towards change. Change is possible. We are required to strew our flowers about, and we need to remember that we're strewing those flowers about not just for those who've fallen, but for those who've served and are still struggling. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeannie. Okay, our next speaker is Michael Brunson from the Chicago's Teachers Union. And when we think about the loss of resources at home, we need to think about closing of schools, we need to think about kids not having the basic schools to get to. Michael Brunson is going to be talking about that forefront issue. Michael.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michael Brunson. I'm one of the officers of the Chicago Teachers Union, and I am also a veteran of the United States military, Army Infantry. I am also the son of a veteran of the United States military, Army Infantry. My father served in World War II. I served during the Vietnam era. Luckily, I did not go to combat. I missed it by 1 day. I joined the United States Army, and I specifically wanted to go to the infantry, and I specifically wanted to go to war. But what happened was the last guys that got sent over to Vietnam left the day, were the ones that had went in the day before I joined. So instead, I ended up in Central America, in Panama. Let me start with a quote from Reverend Martin Luther King. He made this in December of 1967 at Ebenezer Baptist Church. It is one of the strangest things that all the great military geniuses of the world have talked about peace. The conquerors of old who came killing, they came killing in pursuit of peace. Alexander, Julius Caesar, Charlemagne, Napoleon, all were alike in seeking a peaceful world order. If you read Mein Kampf closely enough, you will discover that Hitler contended that everything he did in Germany was for peace. And the leaders of the world today talk eloquently about peace. Now, this was said back in 1967, I don't hear much talk about peace anymore. I hear about a war on terror and terrorists and national security. I have an app on my phone called Metadata that pretty much tracks drone strikes. And they come in every day. 8 people killed here in Yemen. 12 people killed here in Pakistan. People killed here in Somalia. I never knew that we were at war with Yemen, Somalia, and Pakistan. Why are they being hit by drone strikes? But that's the world we live in today. So, as I said, I went into the military. I joined the military. I was gung-ho and ready to go. But something happened while I was there. When I was stationed in Panama, there were 2 things that I want to bring up to you. The first is, the first company that I was stationed in, there were members of my company from the My Lai massacre. The sergeant that conducted the massacre and some of the men that were also caught up in it. And I'll never forget the burden that some of them had to carry. Now, the sergeant that conducted it, he seemed as though nothing fazed him. It seemed not to bother him. But from what I know now about what war does to you, I can only imagine where he is right now. But there was another guy, a Native American, and it was tearing him apart. He couldn't seem to get over it. So that was my first awakening. The second thing was I started asking, why am I here? And I did that because this young lady that I was, close to, everything was fine. We used to have a good time. And one day we're out and we're passing by the base, and she just said, "Get out the base, militaire." And it was something about the way she said it. It was so much emotion. I had never gotten that much emotion from her. So I started thinking, well, why are we here in Panama? And I started reading. And I have to tell you that my political education came not from the school system, but from the libraries when I was in the military, from simply asking one question: why am I here? And why do the people that I come in contact here, they treat me one way with a smile on their face, but they really don't like me? And why are all my my fellow soldiers here, why do they all think that we're so much better than they are? Because the average Panamanian looked like me. But there was this wall between us. So I had to study. And I started studying Panama. And there was another thing that happened while I was there. There was a place close to us, there was something called the School of the Americas. Have any of you heard of that? And at this, and we're talking 1973. And I didn't know anything about this school. All I knew was that I saw some of the creepiest guys that I had ever seen going in and out of that place. It was only later in life that I learned that these guys that we were training in the School of the Americas in the 70s went out across Central America in the 80s, and they overturned governments and conducted dirty wars, and they did a whole lot of horrible things, and they were trained right there at the same base, next to the same base where I was going through my infantry and jungle training. I left Panama and went to Fort Benning, Georgia, and lo and behold, there was another branch of the School of Americas there. So it just struck me as strange that I never knew really what that was about until about 10 years later, when I started hearing things about guys that had graduated from the School of Americas and what they were, not 10 years, maybe almost 20 years, what those guys were doing. So I guess the message from that is we need an educational system that actually does teach us about the world. Our students need to know about other countries, because the way it goes now is they never even know about them until we invade them or bomb them. So that should be embedded within our educational system, but right now our educational system gives short shrift to things like that. Right now, it's all about passing a test. Right now, it's all about math and science, and those are good things. But we must have the humanities. We must have things like history and social studies, things that give us context, things that will create citizens of not just this nation, but citizens of the world. So I just wanted to bring that up, that when we talk about education, we need to think not only about what's being done through the school system, about how it's being defunded, and about how we don't have libraries and counselors and social workers and nurses. And now I find out that they found lead in one of our schools over the limit. And there are lead in other schools. It's not over the limit, but how much is too much? There's a lot that's going on physically within our schools, but the ultimate battle is the battle for the mind. We have to think about the curriculum that our students are going through, are gaining from our public school system, and how the curriculum that they go through prepares them for this world. Are we preparing them to be citizens or soldiers? Are we preparing them to be participants in a democracy, or simply consumers and laborers? We need to start thinking about that very carefully. And I just want to end up by saying I'm really upset about the fact that I'm going down the street, and you got guys on the street with the buckets, with the signs, and they need a handout, and so many of them are veterans. What's going on with that? We have people that have made the ultimate sacrifice, and they're out there on the streets, homeless and without services. When we talk about honoring our veterans, that is where we should start. Let's take care of those who made that sacrifice for us. We should be making a lot of noise about the fact that we have veterans of these Middle East wars that are begging on our streets, committing suicide, and they have nowhere to lay their head at night. We need to look into that. So I just want to thank you for giving me the time to speak to you. And I want to end with another quote here from Martin Luther King. And it says, "A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death." We need to fund our schools. We need to fund our community services. We need to take care of our veterans. Thank you.
Okay, guess we're gonna have to hold this. We have a last-minute addition to our speakers today, and a great addition. Adelena Marshall, National Nurses United, is here, and she asked to make a few remarks. Adelena?
Thank you very much. I come here representing myself as a proud registered nurse working for the VA and caring for our American heroes, because those who walk through our halls at the VA, we look at them with honor. My father was a World War II vet, and I worked for an airline for 31 and a half years, and I was able to take him back to Europe, and we visit the cemeteries there for our fallen soldiers in Europe. And coming back and have had that experience, and with today's rhetoric, it's very disturbing to know that many of our soldiers who lost their lives during World War II lost their lives for a similar person who promoted bigotry and racism and started a war, War II. We're now confronted with someone who is preaching those same things. And we need to think about what our soldiers, and in their memory, that they lost their lives to fight against this. Also, when you hear a lot of talk now about privatizing the VA, please be mindful that there are many, many hospitals that are closing throughout our country. And if we lose the VA to profiteers, where will our veterans get treated? Those of us who work at the VA are very dedicated. Do we have problems at the VA? Yes, we do. But we are all working to improve that. And we hope that our veterans, as they come in, they demand a service that they are truly entitled to. We are working with a severe shortage, staffing shortage across the board, but of course also with the RNs. Just last week there were 3 RNs on the evening shift that had to take care of 28 patients. There was no extra staff to be had. So that's another problem, is the hiring process in the VA. We also, I myself, challenged the VA to hire our veterans versus family and friends that seem to have a pass to come in and they tend to be able to get hired. So I'm always challenging that. If there was a vet, how come this vet wasn't hired? We have many vets that work throughout the VA system, and to say that we're not delivering the kind of care that our patients need is a fallacy. Of course, we do have isolated situations. However, our nursing staff and your fellow vets are really dedicated to caring for our vets, and we feel that you get the best care coming through the VA. Matter of fact, we have other hospitals raiding, trying to pull our nurses away to care for the vets that they want to draw there. But we do want you there. We have many, many programs, and our staff is really dedicated to caring for our veterans. And in memory of those who have passed and who fought the wars to keep America great, we've always been great because of our veterans.
Thank you, Adelena, and thank you for the work that you and the nurses do. Our final speaker today is someone probably most all of you know, Barry Romo, of Vietnam Veterans Against the War. I first met Barry in 1987, and we've been close friends since, and comrades. People know what that means. Barry was a national leader of VVAW for more than 40 years. He kept the organization going in the skimpy days when we didn't have many active members, and he and others kept the paper going. He used to do the veteran on his dining room table in his apartment. That's how far we've come. All right, Barry, your turn.
I'm shameless. nothing gets done without money, except, of course, gifts. And so this new stand was made by a Champaign-Urbana carpenter who made it, I think, just from the pictures, because of the problem we had with finding the pieces of the other one. And so we have to thank him. It was totally free. The speaker in front wasn't. It cost a lot of money. And so we're going to ask you to donate money before I talk about other things. And here's a wonderful VVAW thing where you can stick your money in. And so that's the first thing. We want your money. We are glad you came, but we need the money to continue with the paper. When we first came back from Vietnam and discovered something called post-Vietnam syndrome, which then morphed into post-traumatic delayed stress, we could watch and see the number of Vietnam vets who were killing themselves. And by 1985, it was estimated that 60,000 Vietnam vets, more than died in the war itself, had taken their own lives. And most of the people who killed themselves were not covered under suicide. In Mississippi, they were undercupping, according to the Journal of American Medicine, at the time, by 90%. So sheriffs and other people were labeling single car and single motorcycle accidents that JAMA realized were suicides. Now, that wasn't to hide the number, actually. It was because if you were a Catholic, they wouldn't bury you in the cemetery if you took your own life. Some insurance companies wouldn't pay. And so they were trying to do a good thing. The bad part was people didn't realize how bad the situation was. Today, I have maybe 8 friends that have killed themselves, people I know, in the last 8 years. Exactly one of them is listed as a suicide. And that's because he hung himself in his home. I had a friend I worked with for over 20 years at the post office. And a friend who I would see 4 days a week. He worked on the dock, Vietnam vet, former medic, and a good union member. A man who knew everything about guns, and he walked into the basement and blew his brains out 3 years after retirement. His family didn't cover it as a suicide. Everyone who knew him, at least I think we knew that, because it just can't be a mistake like that happening. So when they're saying 22 a day, it's easy that it's more than that. I have 8 friends who killed themselves by catching AIDS and then sharing AIDS during that crisis of the 80s. Only 3 of them were gay. The other 5 that I know was killing themselves because they were still shooting heroin after all that years, and they were still sharing dirty needles because that seemed to be an important thing. And so I want to say it's probably a lot more than 22 a day, and that's scary. finally, I have the new issue of the paper. Hopefully someone will put a box over there. It's the new issue with the new design. After 1971 was the first year, and it's never stopped publication. Had to go to a new design because the presses all got old and all the new presses are different. And now Jeff Machota, this will be his 20th year of putting the paper out. And it used to get put out on my living room table, that's true. And the nuns could never get me to learn how to spell, even with Blues Brothers size 3-foot yardsticks. And so every time an issue came out, there would be a contest, and who could find the most misspelled words in the headlines. And then they would get a free whatever of the paper for a year's subscription. And I'm not kidding, that's the truth. So 1, money, 2, the paper's 3, whatever. And finally, after, also we've got flowers here, and we've got enough for everybody. We've got some roses, we've got some other stuff, and we would love it if you, the last part is always silently putting the flowers in the river and remembering people, both people we killed and our friends who died, and we hope to continue that as well. And finally, we're going to Quenchers after this. And Quenchers is a great place, is on the corner of Western and Fullerton. And we've been going there for decades. People used to go there after their South Side Vet Center 20 years ago. And it's always been a warm place. And so warm in the heart, not warm like the sun. And so we would like to invite all the people to go there. Hopefully you'll drink too much. And again, Quenchers, after this, probably about an hour after this event. But you can get there before that and start drinking. And so I hope to see you there so that we can share some friendship and be able to listen to you talk as well. Thank you. I'm saying one last thing, because it's so, VVAW over the years has given on Vietnam projects, helping the Vietnamese, over $100,000 in the 90s when we paid for everything for libraries to have bathrooms. And when people think about libraries, they don't think what it would be like in a third world country. We did. And just recently, VVAW sent $5,000 to a Vietnamese NGO, and they're going to build 2 homes. And so in 80 years, when Vietnamese come and look at these homes paid for by Vietnam vets against the war, rather than spit and say, damn those people from the American war, they'll feel good because they'll have a place to stay and live.
Raise your voices, join your hands, let peace prevail. Justice and mercy in every